We are in Tennessee, just outside of the Great Smoky Mountains. Found ourselves a camp spot out here. Beautiful, luscious. It's spring up here. There's a lot to be seen everywhere. It's really amazing. And so we have oaks and we have maples and we have all these amazing trees up here, and we have the streams and we have the water. Now it's about 11 o'clock right now, and you can see that there's still a very soft, gentle light up here. And we have semi-overcast, so sometimes the sun comes through, sometimes it's just the clouds over here. But there's something to be thought about in terms of this light. And if you kind of look around, I mean, you see, number one, what you see in your mind's eye. What do you want to make? And then number two, how the light around you or what you're going to make or wait for is conducive to that. Meaning I'm going to modify the light, or I'm going to wait for the light, or I'm going to take it the way it is. Right now, you know, as we get down into the tree canopy down in here by the water, we're seeing that it's a little bit flat. That doesn't mean it can't be completely beautiful. Now, a lot of this depends on the subject. You want dimensional light on your subject. So the flat plane down here of the water, right? We're seeing that it might be maybe a little bit too flat for some situations. And yet I could see coming in here and saying, well, let's do a contrasty black and white or something like that. Let's slow down the shutter speed. There's always something you can do in every situation. I would say for me, the most challenging of situations to do something amazing with is the harsh overhead sunlight. And even then, there's always something you can do, because you can always find an area where that light is filtered, where our camera lens and our sensors will be able to interpret that with the beauty we see it. Have you ever noticed that when you're walking around sometimes in overhead sunlight, maybe in the forest, that you think, man, it's really beautiful out here. This light is great. I mean, it feels glorious, right? And then you put a camera to it, and it doesn't work. It's not so much that harsh overhead sunlight is bad light. It can be absolutely beautiful, if different than your morning and your evening light. I think more importantly, it's that our cameras can only capture so much without becoming distracting. Meaning our eyes, we can pick out those details. We can see the emphasis of what our mind is focusing on. As the image makers, though, we have to direct the emphasis in the scene. So think about that when you make an image. There should be one subject. And I say, okay, well, what's my subject going to be? Maybe I'm going to take Anna and I'm going to set her out on this rock, you know, out here in the forest. And so I say, well, I'm going to set her on this rock. Now I'm going to be thinking, hey, look at this rock, and let's think about it in relation to it. We got this beautiful scene. Let's change our perception, our perspective up and down. Let's make it so the trees are not a distraction to that. Not a lot of ratio. It's very soft, but we probably got like a 2-to-1 ratio from one side to the other, because our sun or our intenser light is coming from this direction. And so we come back here and you can see that there's a ratio on my face. Okay, so you're thinking about now your light in relation to the subject that you want to convey in that particular image. Now you say, how can I emphasize the subject? We're back to there being one subject, right? With one subject, it doesn't mean there's not other elements in the frame. It means that the one element needs to be emphasized. You know, the waterfall, the little girl, the bride. What is it that you're trying to emphasize in the scene? If you know that, always ask yourself, and I tell people this in classes, ask yourself, what is the subject? One of the most common mistakes I see in image making is people make an image and it's pretty and there's colors, but they're trying to figure out why people don't love it. Why aren't they raving about it? Especially for new photographers. And there's no subject. Your mind's eye needs to be focused on the subject so that the viewer's eye is also focused on the subject. Because if it's not, you don't have a subject. In an hour, we might have dappled sunlight. In the morning, we have the soft glow. In the evening, we have the soft oranges. So there's this different light in different conditions, but it varies, of course, by what's overhead, by how we're modifying it, by how the tree canopy is, by where the shadow is, what's in the background. And so if I say, well, there's a beautiful portrait right here on this rock, but the sun's coming out and it's putting dappled sunlight back on the trees, we actually get to the point where the subject on the rock becomes not so much the subject, because the intense light behind us is going to distract from the subject. So think about all the surrounding light. Now, does that mean I don't make a portrait? No, it might mean that I light her more, or more likely in a case like this, it will mean that I'll move or adjust the frame to get the dappled sunlight out And I'll do this all the time. I'll cut a little bit of dappled sunlight. I'll end the frame right at where the sunlight begins, or I'll move the frame toward the glow and away from the harshness. What I'm getting at here is we always should be thinking about our space and our position, our line and our tone, but we should be combining that with something else. And that is, what is our subject right here today? You know, not is this light good for every single kind of image, but what's the subject right now? And then how can I best utilize the light right now to emphasize the subject, to spotlight the subject? How can I surround the elements in the frame? You know, I don't want this tree back here, right? I don't want this tree intersecting right in my head, okay? That's more distracting. If I just move a little bit this way, now I'm framed by the tree. We got a nice ratio on his face right up here, darker on this side than on this side. You know, at least a 2-to-1 ratio kind of come across, almost a Rembrandt light feel there. And then we've got the beautiful greens, but the positioning in those greens is key. Here he's sitting on the rock, and we could certainly tinker with this pose more. I'm mainly wanting to do a quick example today. But notice how I've placed his head in between the trees. We don't want his head coming out of the trees on either side. We don't want to be too high to where he's right in the seam of the color change. We want to kind of put him where, now, okay, now he's clearly the subject. And look at this scene here when we think about this. Asher, go ahead and bring your legs together just a little bit closer and set your hands on your knees, okay? On top of this hand, just like that. There you go, nice and casual. That's what we're looking for. Excuse you. Now I would probably turn Asher a little bit to the sides here, because this is looking a little awkward in terms of his positioning. But my main emphasis here, go ahead and turn a little sideways, buddy, is overall the perspective of this scene. This will be a situation where I'm getting to take in the environment of the scene. I'm getting the trees, I'm getting the foliage and the lush green, and yet I don't lose the subject. Your eye will go straight to him. Now I might even burn down this a little bit. I might burn down this in the final image. So now I'm visualizing, I'm looking in the mind's eye to think, okay, what can I do in the final image? How do I want to make it look? And that's a nice little pose we got right there. And you get the idea. Now, if we were doing a full session, I'd spend a little time and we'd do a little more, but I think we actually just here made a few nice practice portraits of Asher on this rock. And the main emphasis is there's different ways to do this. Sure, we could go up. Here's another perspective we could take, is we could cut the trees entirely and make kind of a neat image from the overhead perspective, which of course is going to be a little more of the childlike looking up at the camera. And a lot of times I want to make my children's photos, you know, I want to make them look like young men and women. And so I'll bring that perspective down just a little bit. But you can see that we can control every aspect as long as we're analyzing. And what this is really about is we're looking at the background. We're looking at the light. We're looking at what the subject truly is, and we're tying all those strings together in relation to one another. No matter where we are, we can find light to make our images beautiful. It's always there somewhere. We just got to know how to take it, make it, or wait for it. It's only been a few minutes, but just to contrast the difference, now we have some breaking in the clouds, so we have some dappled sunlight. Now there's still some beautiful spots with beautiful shade, but let's just kind of swing around and take a look. And you can see that this same rock now is completely different. We have the same scene, but we're getting a totally different level of clipping on the highlights and harshness. Now that doesn't mean you couldn't make a portrait here. We could fill this with light. We could put a scrim over the top to filter that sunlight and make it softer. But then we have to take into account the background, especially on an environmental scene like this. And this goes to what I was talking about. You see when we get to that tree line, let's say we soften this foreground light, but we're still getting a little bit more intense light in the background here. Now there's times when this could be really beautiful, but the key is always, always, always to think about what we need for the image that we're trying to make right now. And that's what this all comes down to. Looking at the light, thinking about our subject, and thinking about what we need right now. You can see even as I move around here that in some areas, the light's really nice on me, and then in some areas I'll walk out and I'll be in the harsher light and it changes and it's less conducive. There's always a way that we can use the light to our advantage. And the beauty of image making and photography is we're painters of light. We're painting with that light. And when we understand that we're the masters of light, if we know how to use it, everything changes. We just have to take our time, we have to visualize, we have to think it through, and we have to put all the pieces together.